朋友们，对中东而言8月7号是值得记住的一天。沙特王储萨勒曼、土耳其埃尔多安、巴基斯坦总理夏巴兹齐聚麦加签署麦加协议。消息传出不少西方媒体直言中东版的北约诞生了。该协议最核心的规则照搬了北约集体防御机制，袭击三国任意一国等同于对全体宣战。战火落到沙特、土耳其、巴基斯坦需要立刻驰援，打击巴基斯坦，沙特和土耳其必须介入。这不是普通的军事合作，而是去年沙巴双边防御协议的升级版，直接扩容成了横跨西亚、南亚的三方军事同盟。这三个国家凑在一起，分量的不言而喻。土耳其坐拥北约第2大陆军，在西方阵营里特立独行，是中东数一数二的军事力量。沙特手握能源命脉，庞大的石油资本，掌握了阿拉伯世界的话语权。巴基斯坦呢，则是穆斯林世界唯一的拥核国家，单凭核威慑就足以让区域对手不敢轻举妄动。有钱、有军力、有核底牌，三方联手等于搭建起一套脱离西方掌控的区域安全框架。那么很多人好奇三方为何选择在此时抱团？伊朗的区域影响力是因素之一，但更深层的动因是中东国家对美国安全承诺失去了信心。长久以来的海湾国家花费巨资采购美式的武器，开放军事基地，寄希望美国能守护本土安全。但最近的冲突是彻底击碎了这一份幻想。老美针对伊朗发动军事行动，其中很多行为是依托沙特境内的美军基地发起，海湾国家是被动的卷入了纠纷，而伊朗实施报复，美国却优先自保，风险呢全部压在了东道主沙特的身上。连自己的海外基地都无法完全的防护，美国又怎么有能力来庇护盟友？去年呢，美国默许他的小霸爹突袭卡塔尔，沙特也彻底看清了依附美国的隐患。一直双边防务协议迅速的和巴基斯坦敲定，全程呢也没有提前通报华盛顿。到今年美伊持续的对峙，危机感进一步加剧，沙特顺势的拉拢土耳其入局，三方同盟就此成型。沙土巴对外反复强调协议是属于防御性质，并不针对第三方，也不封闭。科威特呢早已经和巴基斯坦缔结了国防条约，卡塔尔、埃及后续都存在着加入的可能性。一旦多方持续的扩容，那整个中东力量平衡也会迎来根本性的变化。而最先感到不适的那必然是美国了。数十年间，美国依靠着安全绑定，牢牢拿捏中东的局势，但一次次的失信，处处优先自身利益，慢慢的耗尽了盟友的信任。现在区域大国主动的抱团寻求自保，就是一份清晰的信号。美国独家主导中东安全的时代正在褪色。有人说这次结盟是美国暗中推动，想要借助盟友分担防务压力。这种说法是很幼稚的。倘若局势顺利推进，美国在中东的话语权只会持续的缩水。此前的美国曾经计划对伊朗核心设施实施毁灭性打击，而沙特呢又从中临时斡旋劝阻，才避免中东陷入全面战火。区域大事的调解权已经慢慢的转移到了本地国家手中。伊朗呢同样保持警惕，伊朗的议员公开的提醒沙特，单纯依靠对外结盟无法换来长久安全，依附美国呢就是前车之鉴。但同盟既成事实，沙伊之间的博弈会进入全新的阶段。而压力最大的呢，还属中东的小霸爹。长期以来霸爹依靠着军事实力跟西方的支持，在中东保持优势。如今呢，三个关系冷淡的国家形成了防务绑定，单边的军事行动空间也被大幅的压缩。那么在这一场格局变动里巴基斯坦的地位是格外的亮眼。土耳其本就是老牌区域强国，并不让人意外。巴基斯坦呢能够接连获得沙特、科威特的防务邀约，依靠的是实打实的实力。国际上的地位从来是求不来，都是打出来的。之前的印巴空战，巴基斯坦展现出了过硬的作战能力，加上独一份的核力量， 有效对冲了中东小霸跌的核优势。昔日需要接受援助的南亚国家，如今成了海湾各国争相合作的安全伙伴。海外的舆论会把这份同盟跟中国联系在一起，因为巴基斯坦主力战机、导弹大量采购自中国制造。沙特近些年也持续采购中国的装备，摆脱对美式军备单一的依赖。未来三方联合军演、军工协作、中式装备大概率会持续的发挥作用。有人可能会问了，巴基斯坦其实只是一个工具，使用中国武器去打仗的雇佣兵。那么沙特既然想寻求安全，为什么不直接跟中国合作呢？其实并不是沙特不想，沙特其实一直暗中求助中国，希望我们派兵前去驻军。但是最大的问题是中国并不想早早的亲自下场，至少不愿意自己亲自出马来帮他们。那么中国的考量是这样会避免很多地缘纠纷带来的负面影响，避免直接把中国拖入到中东的泥潭。毕竟现在台湾问题都没解决，更何论中东呢？但是我们也可以借着巴基斯坦来保留一个间接影响中东的渠道。但是这也造成一个后果，那就是外界普通的老百姓其实并不会直接看透这一层间接的布局。所以在社会层面，海外的这些国家它并不会直观的感知到中国军事力量的存在。这对于塑造中国强大的对外形象，赢得海外民众尊重层面来说这是一种损失。那么说的直白一点，就是我们主动放弃了自己在中东台前亮相的面子。那么往后退一步我们获得的是相对从容一点的一个布局的主动权。短期对国家长远战略有利，但是放在大众的观感层面并不是一件好事。当然了，这一份三方协议蕴藏着无法忽视的隐患。防御同盟在和平时期是盾牌，冲突爆发时极易成为冲突扩散的导火索。我们也不妨设想一种场景，比如胡塞武装袭击沙特目标，那么土耳其依照协议发起反击，胡塞随后打击土耳其本土。那么作为北约成员国，土耳其遭受袭击会不会触发北约集体防御条款呢？那么一场中东的局部冲突有可能一路发酵，牵动整个西方阵营，连锁反应的风险始终是客观存在的。风险摆在眼前，但三方结盟带来的收益足够有吸引力。沙特拿到了独立于美国之外的安全保障，土耳其扩张了地缘影响力，打开军工外销市场，巴基斯坦也获得海湾资本，持续的扶持，助力自身发展。只不过巴基斯坦下面的印度它的处境就变得微妙了。阿萨一直宣称自己在南亚有非常大的军事优势，反复炒作持枪空战的所谓辛多尔行动有巨大战果，到处去吹牛逼。但中东各国纷纷选择跟巴基斯坦深化合作，这就是对印度虚假叙事的一记耳光。那么随着同盟推进，资金和技术持续流向巴基斯坦军工领域，未来印巴博弈中印度将面临更大的压力。世界格局是不断的轮转，曾经仰仗域外大国庇护的国家，现在开始主动的联合，试图掌握自身命运。当所谓的超级大国不再可靠，被守护者选择之力，一个全新的地缘时代已经悄然的开启。
In a landmark new deal, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and Turkey have signed what is a new NATO-style defense pact. The signing took place in Mecca, which of course is Islam's holiest city. Tehran was quick to respond, saying the deal will not ensure Riyadh's security. Well, Yasmin Farouk is project director for the Gulf and Arabian Peninsula at the International Crisis Group, joining us today from Paris, and it's good to have you. Let's just have a look at the sort of big picture, end of this week. What is your understanding of the diplomacy around, and let's start with the Strait of Hormuz at this point?
So at this point, I think, Becky, we are very clearly seeing that there is a consensus in the region and there's a push by the region to find a way out of this war, starting with the Strait of Hormuz. So even if the outcome is not the best outcome that the Gulf countries and the rest of the region would have wanted to see, but it is better than resuming the war and resuming the strikes on Iran. And hence we see Gulf countries insisting on a temporary arrangement with Iran that leaves Iran at least seemingly having more control than they were willing to allow it to have over the strait. We are also seeing more coordination with the Omani side and the other GCC countries than we had seen previously during this war.
I'm really interested to get your thoughts on this pact we've seen signed today in Mecca between Saudi, Turkey and Pakistan. An historic moment today. It's a pact long in the making. You and I have been following these three countries and Egypt's regional alignment for a long time. You've written that it, quote, reflects a hard-won realization amongst these four states. Security in their neighborhood can no longer be left at the mercy of rivalry between the US and Israel on the one side and Iran on the other. Egypt, of course, not specifically in this defence pact today. This is a sort of NATO-style pact. And I want to get your thoughts on its significance and its consequence. And I have to say, we've just heard from the Turkish communications director for the presidency, who says that this pact isn't sort of aimed or directed at any one country. We've had a pretty negative response to it, of course, from Iran already today.
Look, Becky, if you remember when Saudi Arabia and Iran signed that pact, it was in September of 2025. And immediately afterwards, we started hearing that the Saudi-Pakistan defense agreement was going to be regionalized, that there were discussions of a regional defense pact, insisting that it is not against a specific country. And here what the two countries had in mind is that this is not against Iran, but it is meant to deter Iran and any other country, including Israel, that had just attacked Saudi Arabia's neighbor, which is Qatar. You had a confirmation in January of this year from both the Turkish foreign minister and the Pakistani defense minister that indeed some kind of regional agreement was being discussed. It is very clear, even if the countries do not want to use it and stress that it is a defensive pact, that it is coming at a moment where the region is absorbing the rebounds of the war, Becky. We are seeing, the conflicts being metastasized in the region, whether involving Saudi Arabia and Iraq, Saudi Arabia and Yemen. We have seen an attack on Egypt. So while you are seeing a de-escalation between Iran and the US pushed by the region, you have a new layer of regional conflict that is threatening to continue despite that de-escalation. And this explains this move by the three countries. But I also expect to see other moves among other countries in the region heading in the same deterrence and defense direction.
Yeah, fascinating. What we are clearly seeing is an additional layer of defense, as it were, for the kingdom. You talk about recognizing that the US cannot be the only defense partner, and we are seeing more sort of coordinated action and rhetoric from the GCC as a whole when it comes to regional security. I mean, they've got various different sort of narratives when it comes to where they are at as far as bilateral agreements, perhaps with Iran and all the rest of it. But certainly regional security is a tightly coordinated pact at this point. I want to talk about the US and Donald Trump at this point. The latest US jobs report shows an unexpected loss of more than 20,000 jobs. We are less than 90 days away from the midterm elections. Those I speak to in the Gulf region, acknowledge that Donald Trump's focus is increasingly likely to be on domestic politics. How do you think the Gulf region is navigating what is this US political picture ahead of midterm elections? And what is their sort of ultimate kind of outlook at this point?
Look, I feel that this kind of regional reconfiguration of defense, of coordination, of significantly less public divergences than we saw during this war as part of this reaction, Becky. These are countries, all of them are US partners, and they still prioritize their strategic relationship with the United States, and they will continue to, including Turkey and Pakistan, by the way. And so the reaction to what has been very honestly a very hectic strategy in their own region, but also a US focus on domestic politics, and hence a more incentive to end the war, is by the region trying to come together, but also supplementing it with a layer of international strategic partnerships. We have seen countries like the UAE, but also Qatar and Saudi Arabia itself, approach other countries, particularly in Europe, for example, for enhanced defense agreements. And so while the United States' role, presence, and power projection will continue to be valued, the Gulf countries know that it should no longer be guaranteed or taken for, accomplished, that these elections might change things, that the war itself might change the American footprint in the region, and they are racing against the clock, whether trying to find a modus vivendi with Iran, whether coming together, whether concluding their own regional and also international defense agreements in reaction to these politics in the US. Excuse me.
And finally, because I just want to wrap up this week that we've just lived and reported through, maritime security. We started talking about the Strait of Hormuz. There is, of course, another really strategic chokehold, the Bab al-Mandeb in the Red Sea, bottom of Saudi Arabia, Yemen. We have seen again this week a significant sort of pact coming together for securing those waterways. Again, Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey playing a role there in offering some sort of policing of that area. And I know, having spoken to sources around the region, again, the region leaning into the Europeans and others, we may see evidence out loud of some of the support from others, perhaps other support behind the scenes. I guess sort of my closing question is, we've got this maritime security story. We've got the wider defense and security story. Saudis saying they expect to get further attacks from the south, from the Houthis, from the north, from the Iran-backed aligned groups in Iraq. You step back and take a sort of 30,000-foot look at what is going on. What do you make of these? I don't know whether to describe these as shaping or sort of shifting alliances, whether they are deepening alliances, the wider story when we talk about navigating what might be a new and different looking Middle East. What's your sort of 30,000-foot perspective at this point?
I see from that, if you zoom out, if you want, I see two tracks. I see the track that wants the war to end, so a track of de-escalation, but I also see the region stepping up, Becky. And we have seen it stepping up not only by building coalitions and being willing to, put something on the table and not just calling, maritime, the freedom of maritime navigation as an international responsibility in an abstract way. What we are seeing is the region willing to invest in implementing its own security. We are seeing it through direct military strikes in Iraq and Yemen, which is something that is dangerous, that we don't want to see, that we hope to end with the end of the US-Iran war. But we're also seeing a willingness to invest resources in maritime security, which was not the case before this, Becky. The Gulf countries' position has always been that this is an international responsibility, that the UN, the international community, the US should be doing this. What I am seeing is the region stepping up and saying, okay, we are willing to contribute to this, but in partnership with this international community that should be playing the role as well. And I expect this to continue, and I hope it leads to more convergence and not to divergence. And it was promising to see the number of countries that came together in Riyadh for that meeting. I'm sure it did not escape you, as it did not escape me, that countries that were publicly very divergent at the beginning of this war among the GCC itself were present in Riyadh.
Yeah, I think you're making some really, really good points. I mean, those those waterways, international, and you're right, from the outset, these countries have said, look, it's everybody's responsibility. But this effort to really take some sort of ownership of this with others is, of course, important. These are international waterways which, at the end of the day, feed the world economy. And we've seen the impact of these this economic terrorism, call it that, if you will, certainly the line from the UAE, on the world economy and people, thousands of miles away.